The receipt is 11 inches long. You didn't ask for it to be that long. You just bought gum and the machine spat out a scroll of coupons for products you'll never buy, and at the bottom in small gray print it says your total, $1.09. You stand there in the fluorescent light holding a piece of paper longer than the thing you purchased. This is what $1 looks like in 2026. This is where it starts. $1, what it actually buys. A dollar in 2026 buys less than at any point in recent American history when adjusted for purchasing power. The Bureau of Labor Statistics CPI data shows the cumulative effect of post-pandemic inflation has permanently repriced most consumer categories. A dollar that bought a small coffee in 2019 now buys a fraction of one if it buys anything at all without a coupon attached. What a dollar actually buys in 2026, one vending machine item at the cheapest price point if you can still find one below $1.75, a small fraction of a gallon of gas, a processing fee on a digital transaction for something worth far more, the rounding error on a tip calculation, a single song download on the few platforms that still sell individual tracks. What a dollar buys psychologically is different and more complicated. The specific, quiet dignity of having something in your pocket, even when that something can't purchase anything meaningful on its own. The dollar you find on the sidewalk and pick up isn't about the dollar. It's about the act of not leaving something behind. What $1 invested today actually becomes. $1 invested in a broad market index fund today, left untouched for 30 years at the S&P 500's long-term historical average return of roughly 10% annually, becomes approximately $17.45. This is accurate math and a nearly useless piece of information in isolation. Nobody builds meaningful wealth $1 at a time. But it demonstrates the mechanism. Time and consistent return are the actual variables, not the starting amount. $1,000, what it actually buys. $1,000 in 2026 sits at a specific, interesting threshold, enough to feel like real money, not quite enough to change anything structural. Here's what it concretely buys across several categories. In housing, roughly 2/3 of 1 month's rent for an average American one-bedroom apartment, which currently runs about $1,500 nationally according to recent rental data. Not a solution, a partial delay. In transportation, a used car with enough miles that the reliability math doesn't fully work, or 3 to 4 months of a new car payment, or about 16 months of a solid public transit pass in most major cities. In food, roughly 2 to 3 months of groceries for one person eating reasonably, more if you're buying staples and less if you're buying the version of grocery shopping that includes anything pre-prepared. In investing, $1,000 in a low-cost S&P 500 index fund today becomes approximately $17,449 in 30 years at historical average returns. A number that sounds dramatic until you realize it doesn't cover a year of retirement expenses for most people, but does represent a meaningful, real start. In emergencies, $1,000 is the specific threshold most personal finance researchers point to as the initial emergency fund target, the amount that absorbs the most statistically common unexpected expenses, minor car repairs, small medical bills, appliance replacements, without requiring debt. It doesn't cover everything. It covers the most common things, which is most of what the emergency fund actually needs to do. What $1,000 buys psychologically. This is where the number gets interesting. $1,000 is large enough to feel significant but small enough that its presence or absence changes how an entire month feels. Not what you can actually afford in absolute terms, but how freely you move through daily decisions. People with $1,000 saved make measurably different choices than people without it, not because $1,000 changes their actual financial capacity much, but because it changes their perception of their own financial margin. $1,000 is also the specific threshold where financial advice starts making practical sense. Most mainstream financial guidance, build an emergency fund, start investing, avoid high-interest debt, assumes a degree of baseline stability that requires at least $1,000 available and protected. Below that threshold, the advice is technically correct and functionally inaccessible, like being told to run a marathon when you're still learning to walk without pain. $1 million, what it actually buys in 2026. This is where the reality gap between the numbers mythology and its actual purchasing power in 2026 is widest, most revealing and most worth understanding clearly. In housing, $1 million does not buy a house in most major American cities outright. In San Francisco, New York, Los Angeles, Miami, and Seattle, $1 million buys a modest apartment or a small house requiring significant renovation in a neighborhood you didn't specifically choose for its desirability. In many secondary markets, Phoenix, Nashville, Austin, it buys a genuinely nice house. In rural areas and smaller cities, it buys something that would have seemed like wealth to almost anyone looking at it from the outside. In retirement income, using the widely cited 4% withdrawal rule, which research suggests has historically sustained portfolios through 30-year retirements with a high probability of success, $1 million generates $40,000 a year in withdrawals. The median American household spends roughly $72,000 annually. $1 million portfolio on its own does not fund a median American retirement. It funds something closer to a modest one in a low-cost of living area with Social Security or other income supplementing it. In business, $1 million is a meaningful small business startup budget in most categories, enough to fund a real operation without requiring significant outside capital, but not enough for anything capital-intensive like manufacturing or real estate development at meaningful scale. In daily spending, $1 million converted to spending rather than invested lasts roughly 14 years at median American household spending levels, less in high-cost cities, more in low-cost areas. It's not generational wealth. It's a long runway, and a long runway is genuinely valuable, but it's not the permanent financial freedom the number implies to people who have never run the math on it. What $1 million buys psychologically, and why this is the most important category. The psychological shift at $1 million is real and well documented, even when the purchasing power alone doesn't fully justify it. It's the specific threshold at which most people report that financial anxiety becomes qualitatively different, not absent, but changed in character from, will I survive this month, to, will I make good decisions over decades. Yeah. Financial institutions treat you differently at this threshold, sometimes dramatically so. The bank that was largely indifferent at $10,000 assigns you a relationship manager at $1 million. Loan terms improve. Investment minimums for certain products become accessible. The system reorganizes around you in small but consistent ways that add up over time to genuinely different access. The gap between these three numbers is not just arithmetic. What separates $1 from $1,000 from $1 million isn't simply three orders of magnitude, it's three qualitatively different relationships with money itself. At $1, money is a counting exercise, a tight daily arithmetic of whether enough is present for the next transaction. At $1,000, money starts becoming a buffer, something that creates space between you and the next unexpected thing. At $1 million, money becomes a system, something that, if managed correctly, generates more of itself without requiring your active labor to maintain the principle. Each level requires a different skill set to maintain. This is the part that surprises people who imagine that more money simply solves the problems of less. The skills required to not lose $1,000 are different from the skills required to not lose $1 million. The former is primarily behavioral, spending discipline, boundary setting, avoiding impulsive decisions. The latter adds complexity, tax strategy, asset allocation, estate planning, protection against both bad markets and bad advisors. More money doesn't mean less to manage, it means different things to manage with higher stakes for each decision. The honest bottom line. $1 in 2026 buys almost nothing, generates something real if invested over 3 decades, and carries a psychological dignity independent of its purchasing power. $1,000 is the threshold where survival math starts giving way to planning math, where financial advice becomes practically applicable rather than theoretically correct. $1 million is real, significant, insufficient for the lifestyle its mythology implies, and the beginning of a different category of financial life rather than the end of financial concern. None of these numbers are the finish line. Each one is a different starting point for the set of decisions that number makes possible, and the decisions, not the numbers, are what actually determine what comes next. This is general financial education based on publicly available data and historical market averages, not personalized financial advice. The 4% withdrawal rule, S&P 500 historical returns, and cost of living figures cited reflect widely used research and publicly available data as of this video's production. Actual outcomes vary based on individual circumstances, market conditions, and location. Somewhere right now, someone is holding a dollar bill and feeling like it isn't worth anything. They're right about the purchasing power and wrong about the mechanism, because the dollar itself was never the point. The decision about what to do with it was, and that decision is available at any amount, starting with the one already in their hand.